I really believe that in order to have a powerful magical practice, there are certain principles we can adopt that can help to enhance our practice. And in this video, while I share with you a recent walk along the cliffs following the ocean, I'm going to share with you some vital principles that I believe contribute to a powerful magical practice. So the first principle is that simple doesn't mean less powerful. I think sometimes we can get caught up in thinking that an elaborate ritual or spell with lots of bells and whistles, lots of different materials and tools is going to be more effective. However, I have done spells and rituals that have required no tools, just reciting a mantra and looking at a sigil, and that has been the magic, and the magic has worked. That's not to say that some spells or some rituals we want to work wouldn't necessarily benefit from an elaborate approach. I tend to notice that the default can be more towards the elaborate. And maybe that's our logical mind thinking that the more effort we put in, the more material we add, the different elements we add, it's going to make it a more effective spell. The second principle is to tune in to what matters to you. So this might be the sorts of practices that you want to try and you want to experiment with. I think at times I have forced myself into going down a certain path or trying a particular thing because it's what other people are doing. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. It's good to experiment and try things out. But then I've tended to think there's something wrong with me when I thought, really, this doesn't feel like it fits with me. It must be my fault that I'm not into this as much as other people seem to be. But we are all different. I think we've got to really try and remind ourselves that we can form our magical practice how we want it to be. And I really think that how we form it is about getting tuned in with what matters, tuned in with what feels right. And I don't mean intellectually. I think to know something or to think something from an intellectual or a mind level is far different from that feeling that we get in our bodies. I myself struggle with tuning into my body, and it's something I'm trying to work on. But often when I do feel something quite strongly, if something is pulling me quite strongly, I will get a very strong feeling in my body. I'll get this excitement and this need to know, and I try to listen to that a lot more. Sometimes my quote unquote logical mind comes in and perhaps tries to talk me out of it because it's not what everybody else is doing. But I'm trying to kind of put my logical mind aside more and listen to what's going on from a felt sense. The third principle is to believe in your power. Personally, I don't work a lot with spirits and entities, meaning that I don't approach spirits and entities and perform rituals and say, do this for me, help this to come into being. I tend to do more devotional practices to nurture relationships with different entities and spirits, because for me, I believe that the devotion can cause effects in my practice. It can cause effects in the mundane world for things that are happening. It's not to say I think that asking things of entities is wrong. It's not to say I've never done it in the past, but there's something for me that aligns more in that devotional practice. Personally, I don't want to rely on entities for magical workings. If I do ask for something, it's more to do with how I can change my attitudes or actions relating to a thing and not asking them to do something. So personally, one of the entities, if you want to call it that I work with is Saint Hildegard of Bingen, who I see as very much linked in with creativity, expressing and speaking from my heart and from what I feel is true for me, because she was a woman who very much did that in the face of the church, which was very male dominated and still is, but I think back in the 12th century was probably even more so. And so I do a lot of devotions to her. What I ask of her is, please help me to be more confident with this and help me to do X, Y, Z. I'm not asking her to do something specifically for me, but to instill in me something that I want to effect in the mundane world. Whatever approach you use, whether you work with entities or not, whether you do more devotional practices in terms of how you work, believe in your power, believe in what you are doing, because, and I think it's chaos magic that kind of promotes this, is that the power is in the belief. The belief is the tool. So if you have a belief in what you're doing, that is your way of effecting your magic into the world. The fourth principle for a powerful magical practice is that Magickal is about personal development. I know we talk a lot about magic as bringing about things into the mundane world, but for me, magic is very much about personal development, about creating more awareness around my beliefs that might be keeping me stuck, how they influence me, and how I can start to shift them. Magic for me is about taking more control of my life in terms of how I approach life. Of course, magic is about all sorts of things to all sorts of people, but I find for me that focusing more on shifting my perspective, using it to shift my perspective and how I engage with the world and other people, that has been very valuable for me and continues to be. The next principle is to read widely, and it doesn't necessarily have to be magical or occult books. Obviously, I think if you're researching a particular magical system or magical approach, then yes, read books on that. But I think there are other books that can give us inspiration as well. One book that I came across thanks to Denis at Foolish Fish, he had it on his channel, was the book by Rick Rubin on creativity, and I can't think what it's called now, but I will put it up on the screen. I've been using that book as a kind of bibliomancy. I remember one morning I was praying to St. Hildegard and I was asking her to help me to continue to be expressive and creative from a place that's dear to my heart, rather than doing it from a place of wanting a particular outcome, specifically with this channel. So avoiding making videos just for views and subscribers, but talking about things that I really believe in and really passionate about. And so I prayed to her, and then about 30 minutes later, when I was in my living room, I just was fanning through this book and it stopped on a page. I will put the page up on the screen. I took a photo of it because I was so surprised that came up, but it was almost like Hildegard was answering that prayer, like giving me advice. It was, if we can tune into the idea of making things and sharing them without being attached to the outcome, the work is more likely to arrive in its truest form. That is exactly what I needed to hear after that prayer to St. Hildegard. It was just, I was going to say it was bizarre, it was weird, but we know that we get these messages at the time we need them. So don't feel that everything you read has to be magical. There are lessons we can learn about magic and about our engagement with the mundane world that come from unlikely sources. The next principle is that your imagination is a powerful place. And I think this quote came from Long Milo Duquette, who said, "It's all in your head, you just have no idea how big your head is." I think that's from Chicken Kabbalah, because I have read that book, but it was a little while ago. And so yeah, this sense of the things that we manifest actually come from our minds before they're manifested. If you think all the inventions in the world came from someone's imagination, came from them imagining what could be, what the possibilities could be, and then they brought them into being, a bit like we see in the magician card, like calling down things from beyond, from above, and manifesting them down into the physical world. I've used my imagination, I've used visualizations to meet with my ancestors, to meet with my inner child, to do work in that area, and those have been very powerful experiences. I think we forget that our minds are very powerful and they're very good at taking us to negative places, at taking us to worst case scenario places. That's what my mind is very good at doing. And when we imagine those worst case scenarios, we can get caught up in the emotions of what that would be like. So why don't we use our minds for far more positive and powerful means? If we make that concerted effort and that conscious effort to shift our minds into a more productive place, we can do that and we can get some really good results with that. The next principle is that the mundane is equally as important as the magic that we do. I think this is where I have trouble sometimes when I watch videos where people talk about manifestation, and they talk about it in the sense of you just have to think about it, imagine what you want, and it will come. There is no mention of having to do anything yourself in the real world, in the mundane world, to achieve the outcome you want. And I think that is so misleading. I think it can lead to a lot of disappointment for people. I think people can end up thinking that they just didn't want it enough and therefore they don't deserve it. There is not one ritual or spell that I have worked where I've not done something in the mundane alongside that in order to enhance the possibility of that outcome occurring. I think as well, my personal opinion is, I think it's quite rude to assume that we can just ask for things and not do anything to help in that process. It feels a bit entitled, if I'm honest, to do that. So when you're thinking about working a spell or a ritual for a particular outcome, think about what you're going to do as well. Think about what part you're going to play in that process, because magic can do so much, but then I think we have to meet it halfway. The next principle I believe helps with a powerful magical practice is set it and forget it. Once you've done your spell, once you've done your ritual for a particular outcome, do not dwell on that outcome. Let it go. You've said your piece, you've sent it out into the universe or the ether or whatever you want to call it. Let go of the outcome. That doesn't mean to say that you don't do the stuff that you need to do in the mundane world in order to increase the chances of that magic working, but do not get attached to the final result, because actually you don't know how that result is going to come about. The magic that I've worked worked. The things that I've wanted to come into being, if you like, to be manifested, have never manifested in the way that I expected. I do my best to let go of any expectations about how something is going to manifest. I leave it. I trust that in whatever I've sent out will happen in the way that it's meant to happen, or the way that certain forces or entities decide it's going to happen. The next vital principle I believe in for a powerful magical practice is to remain open-minded. And when I say this, I mean in terms of certain magical practices. If you've never tried a certain magical practice or tried a certain magical system before, don't close yourself off to it just because you're unsure of it. Equally, don't force yourself into doing something that you don't feel comfortable with. I'm not saying that. But if you're a bit unsure, just give it a go and see how it feels. You won't know if it's for you until you try it. There are certain subjects I've kind of shied away from, and when I've actually read about them, they've actually piqued my interest and I've gone down a bit of a rabbit hole. But don't be closed off, because you never know. Even the subjects that you end up not really pursuing because they're not for you, you can still potentially learn from them, even if it's learning what you don't like or what you don't want to do. I think the more open-minded we are, it's almost like feeling your way through, testing different things out and finding what works for you. But I don't think we can hone in on what works for us and what we like unless we give a bit of space and open-mindedness to what's out there. And then as we read widely and we start to kind of, almost like a funnel effect, we can start to funnel in and hone in on what really matters to us. The next vital principle for a powerful magical practice is to have a secure base to come back to. And what I mean by this is to have some grounding and centering techniques, not just for before and after rituals or magical workings, but for the day-to-day. In order to be able to practice magic and to engage in devotional practices, we need to be grounded and centered. We need to be tuning in with our bodies and how we feel. In my opinion, we don't really want to be performing magic if we're not feeling it, or if we're feeling a bit off. I think we need to be in a good grounded and centered place to be performing magic, because it's tiring. It can be very mentally and physically draining. And if we're performing those rituals and practices from a suboptimum place, it may affect the results that we get. That is my thinking behind it. And also, aside from that, it's just generally looking after ourselves. So not only engaging with regular grounding and centering techniques, meditation practices, but also treating our bodies well, exercising, eating well, eating nourishing foods, getting enough sleep. Our body is a vessel for our magical practice. So if we neglect our body, if we neglect looking after ourselves, we're neglecting one of the major things that forms part of our magical practice. And I have some thoughts about when magic may become unhealthy, when we may be engaging in unhealthy elements of magical practice. So if you want to find out what these are, then there's a video up on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the visuals today. I will see you again soon.